because you are so much into your inner thoughts. Okay, so your first physical body is walking, but your mental thoughts are roaming around somewhere else, not in the present. This is what happening in the class also. Okay, so you will be physically present, but mentally you will be absent. But this mindfulness walking, as I already told you, this will help you to improve your sustainable behavior also, not only your well being. When you do some kind of action, that will help you whether you're doing it a right thing or a wrong thing. Okay. And what exactly do you willing to give for the future generation? They have conducted an experiment. Okay. So parents were called, 10 parents, okay, all adults, and they have been given color pencils, okay, and they have given chart papers, and the experimenter said that whatever you want you can draw and color it, okay, and they have finished their drawings, okay, and they were asked to come out with their drawings, and next their children, whoever the parents, their children have sent inside the same room, and they said already we have given the color pencils, so you draw your pictures, whatever you want you draw it, okay, and chart paper also were given, and the children started drawing the pictures and do the colorings, okay, and the children also were asked to come out with their drawings. So they were in a opposite direction, and they asked the parents to show their chart papers, their drawings. Their chart papers were filled with colorful drawings, so much colors, all the colors were used, okay, and they asked the children to show their drawings. The children had only black and white drawings. What did you understand from this experiment? We, the elder generation, we are utilizing, we are using, we are destroying, and we leave nothing colorful to the future generation. Okay? We are taking all the greeneries, we are using all the resources, okay? But we never thought about our future generations. What will they do? We utilize all these resources. Are we thinking about them? What your children would do? What your grandchildren would use? What will they get? Why is it happening? This is because this is like no. Let us compare the past versus present. See, actually, if you take the past lifestyle, it is totally different. Whatever your grandfather and grandmother had, that lifestyle, now we are not following. Even the lifestyle is coming back, it is coming with the modern code, right? Whatever earlier they said, this is not the lifestyle we have to follow. We have to follow the different lifestyle. But now it's all coming back, right? And food, whatever the food they have eaten, your parents have eaten, you're not eating the same. You're going for fast food, You know that is not good for health, but still we crave for it, right? Why? We think that our, like, no, to show our modernity, or what do you want to show, like eating those kind of foods? If one person is eating, like, no, that normal traditional food, we try to bully them. We say that no, no, go, he's not, or she's not decent enough to eat all these foods. They are like that. We tease them. But what is actually good for us? Actually, one study says that in US, people, almost 10 out of 8 people are having psychological problems. What is their standard diet? Pizza, burger, sandwich, all those what we eat here as a fast food, that is what they are eating their regular standard diet. So you know how much their mental health is affected, right? So by following this food, you might think that why I'm talking about the food. I'm not only talking about the food intake. You go to the bigger process, how you process the food. Okay. So to grow that kind of a cereals, we are not growing our traditional cereals and rice, and we are spoiling our soil, almost spoiled. Most of the agricultural land is spoiled. Clothing, you know how much one jeans could contain, the water content, how much water you need for making one jeans. No, US is intelligent. They are very intelligent. They are not manufacturing. They are only procuring. They know. They know how to save their water. They know how to save their soil. Right? They know how to save their, like, no, not to get polluted. Even if it is a air pollution, even if it is a water pollution. They know better than us. So that is why we are manufacturing. They are only procuring from us. 100 liters of waters needed for clothing. That is for making one jeans. Okay. But only 10% of water is needed to make a dhoti. Okay. Take the lifestyle also. If you use the Indian toilet, this is the, like, no, real scenario I'm talking about. You might think that is that so. Yes, it is like that. If you use the Indian toilet, you need only one small bucket of water, that's it. Okay, if you go for one bathroom, at the most 2 mugs are enough. But when you use the Western toilet, I used to see every day when I use that Western toilet in my house, no, sometimes it gets blocks, and I pour almost 3 buckets of water inside that thing to flush it. So once you go for a one bathroom, you flush almost 2 to 3 buckets of water. Where is the 2 mugs and where is 3 buckets? So what actually we are going behind? What are we doing? We don't want Indian toilet. We want only Western. Everything is westernized. Everything is, we want like a Western type only. And almost we are destroying everything. The consumptions, as the parents consumed all the colors, they left only the black and white color pencil for their children. We are consuming everything, whatever is available now in the environment. We are not leaving anything for the future generation. what kind of a selfish people we are. Think about it. So, what you are going to do for the future generation? What you are going to leave for the future generation? Are you going to leave future generation as you see in these four pictures? Are you going to leave this colorful, or you going to leave as I showed you in the beginning of the session, those six pictures? Are you going to leave that for the future generation? Are you going to give this for the future generation? So thank you so much for the patient listening. I'm sorry I couldn't interact with you. So thanks a lot. Thank you for the opportunity. If
Thank you, ma'am, for the thoughtful words. Many points you have mentioned here. I suppose to think students and other audience can learn such things and will thought on such points. Very grateful presentation. I'm showing my gratitude towards you. And I would like to, this is the second session of our international conference. Very, very nice session, and audience can get such points and nice PPTs and all. And even though the session is in afternoon, everyone can listen your words.
sure.
Thank you,
Thank
ma'am,
you, ma'am. Thank you
for
so
being
much.
here and given such a presentation. Or
Thank you. Thank you so
and
much.
now I would like to invite Assistant Professor Hasnat, ma'am, to give the words of gratitude.
Good evening, all. Today we are gathered here for our plenary session of the International Conference on Advanced Research Insight 2024. First of all, as a part of the Department of Psychology at Mes Keveeyam College, we are very pleased today. We had two wonderful sessions by two eminent personalities, Dr. John Michel Raj and Dr. T. Jorimani. So, first of all, thank you, sir and ma'am. We want to express our gratitude to Dr. Aishwarya Ishmi ma'am, who was once the head of the psychology department, for conducting a session with these two resource persons. And thank you, my dear students and colleagues, for your wonderful cooperation. Once again, thank you all.
Shall I leave, ma'am?
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. Once again,
Thank
all
you.
the best for all the participants. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
dedicated to the discovery and indeed the practice of such compassion. But it is to recognize that until disciplinary normalizing judgment is factored in as an immense discursive obstacle to the exercise of such compassion, it may work to undermine our efforts to heal, both from our own childhood trauma and from the ongoing trauma of trying to survive in disciplinary society. Nevertheless, as part of such exercise in compassion, Mate stresses that trauma is not something one can evaluate comparatively by pointing out that some people have suffered more than others, such that certain forms of trauma are not significant enough to be concerned with. And this is because even something relatively insignificant to adults can be a very, very big deal for a small child and can make a lasting negative impression on them. And so, with that qualification in mind, I know at this point that many of you in the audience will probably be asking yourself the crucial question: could I have been affected by such trauma with a small t when growing up, such that my present reality as I understand it is already informed by the effects of such trauma, which I have not yet recognized and reprocessed? And this is a very good question that it is also totally okay for anybody to ask themselves. Indeed, if you feel afraid to ask such a question, it would be very important to at least ask yourself why you feel afraid to do so. Because after all, it is just a question. Well, for Mate, compassionate inquiry can begin with consideration of the following 5 things. Number 1. Are you able to be with your own pain of the past as it arises in memory? Or do you have to escape from it into other things like taking on a heavy workload or forms of compulsive behavior, which could be anything from overeating to excessive shopping to obsessive monitoring of online social media profiles and so on? Or do you habitually take narcotics of any sort to numb emotional pain? Number 2, do you feel that you can only be accepted if you aggrandize yourself in the presence of others? Or alternatively, do you instead try to keep your head down and hope that no one notices you, because that is when you feel safest? Number 3, do you have difficulty trusting yourself when making decisions, and do you struggle with confidence? Number 4, are there certain things you have difficulty thinking about or certain feelings that you are uncomfortable with and which you instead just push down inside you, which is the literal meaning of depression, that is, to push down? Number 5, do you have difficulty experiencing gratitude for being alive and for the existence that surrounds you? If your answer is yes to any or all of these questions, it may be the case that you are experiencing the effects of trauma with a small t in your daily life. And if that is so, then you would also know, albeit privately, that those effects and negative experiences are as evident to you in your daily inner world as the shaking bodies of those soldiers we looked at a moment ago were evident to them. This parallel is also important for us to note because just like the trauma with a big T of war separated those men from their bodies, even years after the conflict, so too our respective childhood traumas with a small t can separate us from our bodies, so that we lose a sense of when enough is enough, in often very basic and ordinary ways. For example, as I've often advised my own students, when you reach for your favorite snack in the kitchen cupboard at home or touch the handle of the refrigerator, ask yourself, is it physical hunger that you are responding to, or is it emotional hunger that you are responding to? Because if it is emotional hunger, well, then no amount of food will ever be able to quieten that urge. Since in Mate's terms, it is the product of childhood trauma with a small t, not of biological need, that you are trying to ease. But very importantly, as we just said, when we catch ourselves doing the various things that all of us do, so that we are not overwhelmed by our trauma, whatever compulsive activity this might be. We must also be very careful not to judge ourselves harshly, since that too is a cruel aspect of learned disciplinary behavior. As discussed, such cruel behavior is learned both from the normalizing judgment of disciplinary society and from traumatic experiences in childhood, when, as we said, children tend to blame themselves rather than their parents if their emotional needs are not met, because this at least holds out the promise that if the child works harder or becomes better in some or other way, they may one day be loved. So Mate emphasizes the importance of suspending judgment when we catch ourselves in compulsive behavior, and acceptance instead of how we were not and may not yet even be responsible, based on the understanding that responsibility is only possible when someone is able to respond appropriately and effectively. In other words, we cannot hope to be responsible or enabled to respond appropriately at an emotional or psychological level if in childhood we were unbalanced by trauma. Trauma which, as we said, may still continue in our present lives like a memory caught in resin, which accordingly cannot evolve and change along with us as we grow up and grow old. Instead, Mate speaks of compassionate inquiry, which involves very gently asking yourself when you find yourself distressed or caught in some compulsive activity or thought, why you feel the way that you do. And when you do so, to use a tone and a manner of speaking that you would normally use if you were trying to help someone younger than you, someone who is caught in emotional turmoil, someone you really care about, and who you can see is very fragile in that moment. And this is because through such a process, you can begin to develop a consistently compassionate relationship with yourself, or at least with the child you were and still find yourself to be, in relation to whatever compulsive activity you have just recognized yourself to be caught up in. Indeed, for so many people, what is amazing about this process is that when they become genuinely compassionate towards themselves in this way, such compassion starts to manifest spontaneously in their interactions with others, as they realize that they are in the same situation as everyone else. And it is possible that such compassion may yet be understood as a form of activism, insofar as, within Mate's framework, it constitutes the first step toward a new trauma-aware society, one that is growing and maturing beyond the cruel normalizing judgment of disciplinary society. In fact, in the 2021 film linked to Mate's book, namely The Wisdom of Trauma, directed by Maurizio and Zaya Benazzo, we already see how some activists have taken such practices of compassionate inquiry into the very heart of the quintessential disciplinary institution, namely the prison. Indeed, this prison initiative goes well beyond the 1970-1971 initiative of Michel Foucault, who formed the Prison Information Group, or GIP, that tried to usher in progressive change by reporting on the inhumane conditions in French prisons. And this is because, in contrast, the group practice seen in the film actually changes how the prisoners are viewed and also how they see themselves, in ways which, moreover, systematically dissolve the power relationship of normalizing judgment that informed the panopticon, which we spoke of earlier. If you recall, in terms of the panopticon, the prisoner was individualized on the basis of their crime and kept in their cell in the circular prison, never knowing whether or not the anonymous guards in the central tower were watching them, but always feeling the weight of such disciplinary normalizing judgment, which in the image keeps the prisoner silent and forces him to his knees. But in contrast, in the film, we see the inmates gather outside in a wide circle, after which they are asked to step forward toward the facilitator in the center if they ever experienced any of the adverse childhood events that she slowly and clearly lists for them over the microphone. Accordingly, the power dynamics of the disciplinary panopticon are radically altered in at least 5 ways through this process. Number 1, the prisoner is now granted the dignity to stand and the freedom to move if they choose to. Number 2, the facilitator is no longer anonymous but identifiable to them, while she also identifies with them based on their collective childhood trauma. Number 3, instead of facing normalizing judgment, with each step forward, the prisoner is able to testify through the movement of their body to the adverse childhood experiences which traumatized them and which contributed to their criminal acts. Number 4, once they arrive at the center, they are also offered the opportunity to take the microphone and to speak about these adverse childhood experiences within a new context of compassion, where their own status as victims of trauma is publicly recognized and shared, perhaps for the first time in their lives. And lastly, number 5, while the prisoners are thereby educated about their childhood trauma and its effects on their adult behavior and on their mental and or physical illness, in their turn, the prison guards who are still present also learn about their own childhood trauma in a spirit of compassionate inquiry that they can then take home with them when their shift ends. Accordingly, in very practical ways, initiatives like this are making possible new types of subjectivity beyond both the disciplinary subjectivity theorized by Foucault and the somewhat abstract alternatives he pointed to in his later work on the cultures of the self in the Greco-Roman era of the 1st, 2nd century BCE. However, like Foucault's ideas in this regard, an ethics of freedom still clearly informs these contemporary prison initiatives. After all, based on compassionate understanding and compassionate inquiry, their aim is to lead people toward healing at both physical and mental levels, in ways which reduce people's feelings of stress, isolation, and despair, and which thereby stand to break the cycle of trauma otherwise perpetuated by disciplinary normalizing judgment. Accordingly, this brings us to consideration of the next step. In terms of another disciplinary institution that we mentioned, namely the hospital, Marta's own status as a highly respected retired physician has, in many ways, begun important transformative conversations. And these conversations concern not only alternatives to traditional disciplinary medicine, including the use of psychedelics to treat veterans with PTSD, but also how the current education of doctors involves self-neglect and or self-abandonment through its long hours and pressurized exams, which are simply not healthy. Indeed, the trauma of such self-abandoning practices often lies at the heart of so many diseases that such doctors, when they qualify, are then supposed to treat. But this leaves us as thinkers and teachers to reflect on how we might take such compassionate inquiry into trauma further within the last of the great disciplinary institutions, namely educational institutions. Yet I believe that we are far better equipped than those in the prisons and those in the medical fraternity to ask such questions, since devising new types of societies and formulating new sociocultural practices is really what we as scholars have always done, and what we still have significant latitude to do. Thus, it seems to me only a question of how best to move toward an increasingly trauma-aware society, since at this stage, the negative effects of trauma on health and well-being are becoming so well recognized. Of course, each country will have to determine how best to move toward a post-disciplinary and increasingly trauma-aware era, given the different cultural features that characterize its different societies. But it is arguably of the utmost importance that we do so collectively and in our own ways, not only in the interests of human health, happiness, longevity, and life quality, but also for the sake of our students, because it is precisely our students who now find themselves in a position to create a new society and a new way of life that for them is truly worth choosing. I thank you for your time and your patience, and I will now try to answer any of the questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, sir. Any
Very
questions, participants? Sir, one of our students were wondering whether you could explain more about if there is an awareness of atrocity and trauma with without empathy, wouldn't there be indifference? You were talking about the threefold effects of trauma, no, sir? So he was just wondering whether you could speak more about empathy rather than being making them aware about the trauma theory.
okay. I think for Gabor Mate, the first step is to provide the theory of compassionate inquiry or to theorize the need for compassion. And this is because, as we pointed out, in a situation like in a prison, there is a great deal of cruelty. And so the first step would be to point out where the problem arose from, in this case, childhood development trauma, and then also to point out, at least theoretically, how it could be approached through compassionate means. But once you have done that, yes, then I agree with you. We need to move beyond simply the theory of compassion or the theory of trauma towards a lived experience of empathy, which is very much a practical approach and something for which one cannot really have a theory since it is a lived reality when you're able to understand someone else's suffering in relation to your own at the level of the heart. And so there we cannot apply a theory. There we really have to follow our heart to try to connect with another human being when we see that they're in pain. And also, as we're doing so, to realize that their pain is in many ways very similar to our own pain, since we are all in the same boat, so to speak. But in that case, we are moving towards a practice of empathy. And that, I think, links to the ethics of freedom that Foucault mentioned, and that I mentioned in relation to Gabor Mate's, at least the film, linked to Gabor Mate's book. Because an ethics of freedom for Foucault was a way of approaching your life almost at an existential level where you decide, I will do this because I know if I do this every day, it will take my life on a trajectory that would be different from the direction that much of contemporary society is trying to push me towards. And so an ethics of freedom would be, I think, what you've mentioned, looking at empathy as a life practice. So that would take us beyond the theory of compassionate inquiry, the theory of childhood trauma, and it would open up this new space of freedom. And hence we can think of maybe empathy or the practice of empathy as an ethics of freedom. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. So, sir, thank you so much for spending your time with us. And so, without much ado, let me call upon Ms. Shahina for the word of thanks.
Thank
Shahina?
you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening to all. I deem it a great honor and a privilege to propose word of thanks on this memorable occasion. Let me first of all start by giving glory to Almighty God for making today's occasion a resounding success. First and foremost, I thank our plenary speaker, Professor Adrian Connick, Department of Media and Communication, Nelson Mandela University, who graced this session with his insightful words. Thank you, sir. We are grateful to our head of department, Ms. Anubama Murali, for her able guidance as always encouraged us. I thank her for her continued support throughout the session. Thank you, ma'am. And I express my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Reggie A.L., Assistant Professor, Department of English, for welcoming the gathering. Thank you, ma'am. And I extend my sincere gratitude to Dr. Sivya Vasudevan for chairing this session. I owe a special gratitude for the coordinators of Insight 2024, Dr. Faiz K. and Dr. Reggie Ayal, Assistant Professors of English. Last, not the least, I thank all participants, delegates, my dear colleagues and students for making this resounding success. Thank you, sir. Once again, thank you, sir, for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.